Mm.
So I think we can start now. So good morning, everyone. This is the RIP interim meeting end of August. Here is the agenda. So we're not so many people, but we're at least 8 of us. Maybe we should put the list, to the Codim. This meeting is under Notwell, so if you're not aware of the Notwell, please take a look and read those. My guess is that all the people currently present are pretty familiar with that Notwell. We have a pretty tough agenda. So do we have anyone to take the minutes? Is that Adam?
I can try, but if we don't get to my presentation.
Can anyone help Adam, especially because he's presenting?
While Adam is presenting, I'll be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so anyone has any comment on the agenda? No, I'm hearing no. So I suggest we start with the requirements presentation.
So Daniel, will you be sharing the slides from your screen, or do you want me to? Okay, so this is an update on requirements, which is now at Rev 4. Next slide. So what I've done since 108 and didn't do, I did try to address every point that's been raised to the extent that I thought I understood them, and I'm pretty sure I didn't fully understand them. So hopefully we can clear some of that up today. I didn't take suggestions that seemed to me to be based upon the reviewer lacking context on unmanned aircraft systems. Instead, I added the missing context, which will hopefully clear up the confusion. If there were suggestions that didn't seem to have consensus, I didn't necessarily take those. But if they get raised again and the working group expresses a consensus, obviously I will. One point that we've gone back and forth on is, do we want the requirements document to be the glossary for all of the DRIP documents or not? Currently it is, but a lot of people have said, you know, what are all these terms here that you're defining but not using? Well, I've defined them because I figure they're going to be used in other DRIP documents, not requirements. But if the consensus is to take them out, I will take them out. I also had a couple of reviewers who suggested substantial restructuring of the document. I have not done that. The current structure of the document is what we kind of evolved to based upon prior inputs. But if there is a consensus that we need to restructure it, then so be it, I will. And then finally, there's a bunch of little minor corrections and final proofreading that need to be done subsequent to all that. Next slide, please. Okay, so Michael Richardson has indicated that the general requirement number 1 actually has multiple sub-requirements, if you will, embedded in it. And he has suggested that perhaps we might want to explode Gen 1 into separate numbered requirements for those things. And those are the 5 things that he identified as being either explicit or implicit in Gen 1. And we'll see Gen 1 on the next slide. So all of my remaining slides are, back up if you would. We're screaming ahead in the slides.
Yeah, I don't know why you jumped so fast.
There we go. Yeah, so all of the remaining slides are the actual text of the numbered requirements from the draft. Excuse me. So these first 3 requirements here are as they have been for a couple months now. No change here. The only question is whether we want to expand Gen 1 into multiple requirements. So any discussion on that?
Yeah, I think I kind of concur with Michael that this requirement, I mean, it's very personal. I mean, so I'm happy to hear otherwise, but I have the impression this requirement got multiple things in it, and those are different characteristics, so the different requirements. So I'm not saying that it should end up into 5 requirements, but maybe there is a middle ground with that.
I'm tending to agree with it more than I thought about it a little bit, because the which feature we do, which one of those points, and when we look at the different messaging and the rest of it, how that works in, there can be value in breaking it out to allow people to focus on what each piece provides. So I'll give it some more thought.
Okay. And the other thing, so maybe that was a lack of UAS context, but I found that specific. I mean, I don't understand why we said the current sender of the message. Maybe I don't know if the way the requirements are expressed is the simplest way to do that. So that was my, I mean, I think one of my concern when I first read those requirements, but
yeah, that was one of the areas where I added some more context outside of the numbered requirements themselves that should help clear that up. The reason is with broadcast remote ID, we have many very short messages, and conventional internet world ways of connecting the message with the sender are not available to us. We don't even have a session. We don't have a connection. We don't have bidirectional communications. And so there'll be, think of it as a whole bunch of really tiny UDP datagrams, one after another. And how do we know that the n+1th datagram actually came from the same sender as the nth datagram, where the nth datagram contained the identity of the sender, whereas the n+1th datagram contained the location alleged of the sender. So that's what leads to that rather odd wording.
Okay. But the sender is, it can be the drone itself or the GSC, for example.
Yeah, that depends upon whether it is broadcast remote ID, in which case it will be the aircraft itself, or if it is network remote ID, in which case it can either be the aircraft or the ground control station.
But when we are speaking at the speaking of the UAS, it can be broadcast. I mean, the drone. My understanding, and maybe that's I am wrong in that, but I expected that the drone can broadcast, or maybe if it has a direct internet connection, it could send the message directly to the provider.
That's broadcast versus network, Daniel.
Yeah.
And broadcast in every document assumes that is coming from what is up in the air, whereas network could come from either. Could come from the ground station, the ground control station, or come from the item in the air. They are both allowed to do the network connection. Of course, ground control station to tell where the thing in the air is assuming it's getting the information through its command and control link.
Yeah, but
right.
So
and when it is broadcast from the aircraft, it's not IP and it's not bidirectional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. But okay, but in this case, what we want to secure is the communications between the provider. I mean, the ID is important for the provider and the UAS. The UAS might be GSC or the UA. Am I correct?
I'm not sure what entity you're referring to as the provider.
Okay, so I mean the one collecting the location information, for example.
So in the case of broadcast ID, that's any observer with a Bluetooth receiver or a Wi-Fi neighbor awareness networking receiver who's getting it on a direct, layer 2 data link from the aircraft.
Okay. Okay, so we have those broadcasts. Okay. So it's a non-IP communication in that case.
Correct.
Okay. And this ID should work on a non-IP communication, which means the ID itself should be. I mean, do we have an IP communication that's even in the broadcast? No.
Yeah, the broadcast remote ID is non-IP, and there is no room for IP, even with things like robust header correction compression.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So those were just my comments.
Okay. So do we want to move on to the next slide?
I think the cat said no.
Yes, that's the noisiest cat I've ever had. Okay, so these next three requirements are unchanged, but I will mention that at kind of the late in the game, I got a comment that readability, general requirement number 4, may not really belong here at all, because the required elements of information are pre-specified, not by us, and the formats that they are in are pre-specified in the case of broadcast, not pre-specified in the case of network remote ID. And so in most cases, these things are packed, binary fields that no human is going to be able to directly eyeball them. They're going to have to be, parsed by software, and then, lookup tables consulted to say, oh, well, a type 3 is a helicopter or whatever. So I don't know. We may want to ponder whether the readability requirement really belongs or not. But other than making that point, let's move on to the next slide. All right, these general requirements also remain as they have been for the last couple of months. And there is some, in each of the requirements sections, the numbered requirements, I've added explanatory text at the bottom. I don't want to put explanatory text in the numbered requirement because that encumbers the numbered requirement with, interpretation and so on. I want to keep the numbered requirements as short and crisp as possible. And yet at the same time, they do require a little bit of context. And yes, even the GCS could be mobile. Next slide. Okay, so now we move into identifier requirements. And there is, I've tried to group the requirements just to make them manageable, but there's clearly some overlap. For instance, the unlinkability requirement on the identifier could be considered a privacy requirement. Now, I've had that caveat in there of within a to-be-defined scope since the very beginning, because when we first started writing these, we weren't sure what the scope was going to be, and I was kind of hoping that the scope would emerge. Well, the scope has not yet emerged, and one of our co-chairs has suggested that we should, at this point, take a whack at defining it. I don't know if anyone has any suggestions on what the necessary scope of uniqueness might be here.
Yeah, because as far as I remember, my concern was that if we mention it has to be unique, but we have only a limited space for those IDs, they won't be unique for a long time.
Right. And in the solution space side, we have an idea on how to handle that. But on the requirement side, we probably ought to say, you know, how wide and how long this uniqueness is required to hold for.
Yeah, maybe that's the way you see that is a little bit too specific. So maybe must provide some mechanisms so that we don't end up into collisions or something like that.
I think there is actual wording in the in the FAA CONOPS about avoiding an ID being used there in any operational conflict. So there might be wording we can use there for making how unique an ID has to be.
Okay, I'll go look for that in the NPRM. Yeah, I'll look for that in the NPRM and in the EASA documents. One thing I do know is they're talking about hanging on to this information for 6 months. So an identifier has no relevance after a 6-month period outside. So next slide, I guess.
Yeah. So, but just the reason is that, I mean, when I look at this requirement, the identifier must be unique. And whatever solution you're going to bring to, because of that space, if we compare those to the requirement, we will be able to say, yeah, no, it's not unique. So that's the thing I'm sort of try to avoid, so that the solution really match the requirements at the end.
That's reasonable.
So here's where most of the action is, the privacy requirements. Priv 1 confidential handling is unchanged. Priv 3 encrypted storage, as of IETF 108, it had been narrowed based upon prior debate. And at the time of IETF 108, we didn't have much discussion of any further change to that. Priv 2 encrypted transport, we've been going back and forth on this because on the one hand, we're trying to provide privacy. But on the other hand, when safety is involved, transparency trumps privacy. But that transparency is not necessarily to all parties. It's only to those parties who are charged with responsibility for safety, and so on. So this is the latest attempt that I have made at reconciling the two ends of that contest. And I hope everybody can just stare at this for a minute and say what they have to say about it.
I'm good. This follows much of my thinkings after I've delved through the documents, and it's pretty much what I follow in my draft. So I'm basically meeting this particular requirement by what I'm proposing. Not going falling short.
Okay, good.
Okay, then I guess next slide.
I'm just wondering about the storage, if that's in scope of, but that's let's move on.
Well, and actually you'll find something about that in the explanatory text. So on these slides, I've not bothered to present the explanatory text from any of the other requirement sections, but I have for the privacy requirements, which is where most of the debate has been. So Priv 4, designation, that's a new requirement. This results from Amelia's review. It's meaningless to say this is what we're going to do with private information, this is what we're going to do with public information if we don't have mechanisms for determining what is public information and what is private information. And then a suggestion from Michael Richardson, which I found fascinating, was that perhaps we wish to support a pseudonymous rendezvous function where participants may choose to make themselves mutually reachable while continuing to mask the actual name of the pilot and the physical location of the pilot. So I don't know whether we want that one in there or not. I made it a may. And then if we look at the explanatory text, how information is actually stored on end systems is out of scope for DRIPS. That refers back to Priv 3. However, encouraging best practices, including end system storage encryption by facilitating it with appropriate protocol design, is in scope. And then similar logic applies to the designation requirement, Priv 4. So that was the balancing act that we tried to strike between really wanting to encourage privacy best practices, but also not wanting to go outside of IETF, protocol competence and get into what goes on the, IT end systems.
Yeah. So it basically says that I can talk to the pilot of that drone without knowing it's two.
Yeah, that would be the new Priv 5 requirement. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not really a requirement because it's a may.
Yeah. Why do you think it should not be a should?
I'd be quite happy to upgrade it to a should if that's the WG consensus. The real benefit of that, of course, is that two operators who are sharing an airspace volume may need to do what's referred to as tactical deconfliction or self-separation. And when this is automated, it's referred to as detect and avoid, that the aircraft is going to have a radar or whatever. It's going to see the other aircraft. It's going to maneuver so they don't collide. But before you get anywhere near close enough to even have to worry about that, it could be very helpful if the two operators could talk to each other and say, well, I'm going to fly high. Why don't you fly low? And we'll, avoid each other that way and never get even close enough to have to worry about a collision. But that does not necessarily mean that I wish to reveal who I am and where I am physically sitting at the joystick of my aircraft.
Yeah, I it looks to me, but I'm not from that environment that there is no much difference between a may and a should, because in either case, if we have it, it's good. If we don't have it, it's not going to prevent the solution. So
I agree that it's not required. I think that the interesting thing is, I joked it's a dating app, but actually is, hey, did you get cover footage of my drone doing blah? Okay, and I think that by enabling it by enabling this as a for something other than just security and tracking, that it will probably get some additional traction in mindshare in people. But it may also be like, something like, I just got footage of a mugging, but I didn't catch the mugger's face. Did you get it? Right. So that's my feeling on that.
So does anyone have any objection to upgrading the may to a should? Okay, yeah, I will so revise it, and I believe this was my last slide, and I'm out of time.
okay, good. So any comments? So my take on this presentation is that I'd like to understand how people think the draft is ready for working group last call. I have any way to talk to my co-chair, but let's put it this way. Do we think that we can start a working group last call September 1st?
Yes.
Okay. So anyone thinks the draft is not ready for a working group last call?
I think we do need to get the Gen 1 changes in and go a review of that, the list, and then we can call for work group last call.
Okay, yeah, that's correct. Okay.
And also my point that PRIV 3 should become PRIV 5 because of the nature that where 4 and 5 should become 3 and 4.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we do have some very minor changes, but overall, my take is that the next version can be discussed 1 week on the working group, and then we're pretty much ready to start a working group last call. Yeah, so for the working group last call, I'd like to reach out other organizations just for them to show them that we are making progress, and they might come with some other comments. In any case, the requirement draft, I'm not sure about whether we should have a long working group last call, so just to take the time to get additional requirements and so on. But in any case, that should not prevent us to start the solutions in any case. So that's a little bit what I am thinking of, having a long working group last call so that we have the time to gather additional requirements and discussions if they are. Anyone has opinion on that, or?
Except for that being August, still, yeah. I mean, I think you might want to extend it for that reason, to not start it till after Labor Day. But aside from that, I don't see any reason to make it particularly long. I think that either the requirements have arrived or they haven't, and I don't think making it longer will do anything except making it longer.
Okay.
Salo is on the call here, and maybe he can chime in with the ICAO virtual conference being the end of September, whether anything like this would be of value for presenting there.
So are you suggesting that we should end up that before end of September or just after, so that we can get the comments from the ICAO?
I would think we should give ICAO some time there for this coming again. So we should set the time. So I just mentioned I'm pretty much gone the first week of October. Comments ought to be in and I'll still be around kind of. So, finish it up.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So yeah, when I was thinking of a long working group last call, I did not expect a 6 months, but something like maybe a month. Okay, so Michael, do you think having the whole September, let's say mid-September until October 15 is unnecessary?
Sounds too long. I think you're losing focus to do that, but
okay.
I just don't. This is a working group last call, and I think that generally we don't get a lot of last call comments until it goes out to review. If you're going to go get cross area review, that's maybe a different story. You probably are. So
okay, yeah, okay, yeah, we still have that
point.
Yeah, good point, Michael. So yeah, we will have a 2 weeks and let the people know that they have a 2 weeks, so they might send comments 4 weeks after, but we will still have the IETF last call. So yeah, good point.
And perhaps start that on September 8th, the day after Labor Day?
Yeah. Okay, so now, Bob.
Okay. Now getting to actual solution space. And I UAS RID 04, it's actually 05 that I published here. So we go on to the next slide. The TRIPS goals to specify how remote ID can be made trustworthy and available in both internet and local only connected scenarios. That's what we put in our charter. That's what I'm addressing. Next slide.
So local only, is that the broadcast or?
It's the broadcast. That's what we have in the chart. We call local only, but what we meant there was that is the broadcast over whatever radio connection the unmanned aircraft is using.
Okay.
And, we are limited by the outside groups to find some of the things here. We are working within Bluetooth 4 frames, so they said that 20 characters maximum for the this ID. I will point out that the original ANSI for manufacturer ID from an aircraft was 24 characters, and they had to pare down and reissue that to 20 characters. So this 20 characters is recognized as you got to live within 20 characters. Deterministically globally unique, that there's some ways that you can, some mechanism to assure that's global uniqueness. Time period, I don't specify here, but that's that at any point in time, it's deterministically globally unique. Stu did point out that in various documents they're saying for 6 months after it's used, it can't be reused by anything other than what used it. Non-spoofable, provable ownership without internet lookup in 200 bytes because that is the maximum size frame which the authentication messages work with. So we got to do it in that particular frame. Much better for performance if you can look as Adam has found out in operational sense, getting that many chained together Bluetooth 4 packets actually received is challenging. So it's better is less. So those are the design goals. Moving on.
So just for me, the 200 bytes are the size of the packet, and you want the ID, some information, and the proof of ownership within one packet.
What, one Bluetooth 5 packet or 10 Bluetooth 4 packets?
Okay. And 10 is a Bluetooth restriction.
It's not a Bluetooth restriction, but in terms of practicality, as Adam is finding out, receiving more of them, and if you look at time and movement, how long you would have to be in space to be able to receive them. There are some physical limitations. You say, well, can we do 12?
Okay.
So we kind of draw through the line at 10. This line even before us. In fact, some said, let's keep down to 5. And we said, no, let's go to 10.
Okay.
And that maps to Bluetooth 5 frames. That's the payload size for Bluetooth 5.
Okay, so one Bluetooth 5 packet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, one Bluetooth 5 is roughly equivalent to 10 Bluetooth 4.
Okay. Except 1 byte, and then.
Yeah. And I provided a link that gives a really nice layout and how much time it takes to send those from the Bluetooth org site that these actual messages take. So, which comes in again accounting, figuring out like how long should it take to receive this kind of a thing. Okay, so more design considerations. Is a registered string equivalent to non-spoofable? Example is an ANSI CTSA serial number and RFID EPC registered strings. but we expect lying and stealing. We have with the NCT serial number, expect to see lying and stealing. There's no any retrieval for actionable information. There's nothing that says when you that to get that RFID off that thing on the shelf that's not fraudulent. So that's the problem with just a registered string. There is no real trust in it. Onward to the next slide. It's non-spoofable. Well, certificates are spoofable, but the name in them is spoofable because there are multiple roots. And who to trust on the name? We have seen where we seen domain name being fraudulently placed elsewhere. Those typically caught and after the damage is done. But there is no guarantee that a name you see in a certificate, that's the only certificate you'll see that name in. Simultaneous in different routes, who wins, that's another issue. This, by the way, is coming up in discussions in the digital identity work group inside IAO, where they're talking about any craft to other things. They're looking at how they're going to be able to manage this sort of thing in their PKI model. It's actually discuss 4 certificate uses for manned aircraft and manned services. So this is recognized. So consider digital certificates as being non-spoofable, or the certificates being non-spoofable.
But just one thing, when you mentioned the 20 byte, 20 character, is that 20 bytes?
20 bytes. Yeah,
it's not ASCII character then. Okay.
It's right. It's correct. You have bytes which work with. It is assumed that it is a ASCII that does not necessarily hold in some uses.
Okay,
well,
right.
I don't understand what you mean by certificates are not non-spoofable.
I say certificates are nothing else. A similar certificate by in doing this stuff are unspoofable, but the subject in certificate can be in a name is spoofable. The certificate does not prove that that name is, don't name that thing.
I think that depends on the certificate policy and whether the CA is following the rules. Whatever those are under the cert policy.
Well, but you have multiple CAs. You don't have a single CA. That would assume that there's only one CA.
Or that the CAs divvy up the namespace, such as is done with the RPKI.
Yes, and in a global space like this, there are various reasons to not follow rules like that in certain places where there's gaming that can be done. ICAO is looking at being in the digital identity work group. And their next meeting is, they've been on hay for the summer, but they're restarting September 1. And we'll see where that goes in discussions there. I do not want to be bounded by them coming with saying that there will be a single CA domain space which will, PKI space, which will regulate, coordinate all naming.
So if the ICAO is going to run a route for the PKI, then they can audit their subordinates and throw people out who don't follow the rules.
Right now, they run a bridge CA, but they're expanding that to federated model.
That doesn't change what I just said.
Well, then there's no root CA. It's a federated model.
But it's but there's still the audit requirement that the CP could impose.
Mm-hmm. After the fact, after the damage has been done.
So if you don't trust your CAs, then you can't trust the names. I agree with that. If that's what you're trying to say.
I'm leery. I'm gun shy, Russ, and they shouldn't be so leery and so gun.
So Russ, can you just repeat?
I'm saying if there's a certificate policy that's set out and all of the CAs are audited against that policy, if somebody's violating the policy, they're going to get caught.
Yeah.
I should be able to send you the current certificate policy, Russ. They're at draft 0.6. I don't think it's from what Mike Goodfellow at IETF. It's not a secret document. I'll send it your way, and I'll be interested in your comments if you want to spend some time looking. It's not. It's a typical CA policy.
I'm certainly willing to take a look at it.
Okay. I made a note down to support it to you. So, Jan. To be trusted, not spoofable. Okay, an algorithm on trusted information is yield a hash public key into the identity. So that's this on how the assumption public key is proved by the private key and the identity. It's stuff we talked with and dealt with for some time. Next slide, please.
I think, Bob, we have problem hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, but can you hear me now? Is it okay?
Yeah.
To my mic. Okay, maybe about my mic.
Okay, so please restart with that slide, I think.
Anyway, this is I've extracted this text from the slide from in the draft. To be trustable, non-spoofable, identity needs to be self-asserting, and by that the identity is trust information that is a public key, and it's an algorithm that's used on this trusted information that is a public key to yield identity. That is, take a hash of the public key to make the identity. And the fixed length result is best for using elsewhere. After all, we have to fit this into 20 bytes. Global uniqueness hierarchy. Physical uniqueness is not sufficient. That in HIP we had an experiment on distributed hash tables to have global uniqueness, and there were some lessons learned about a global distributed hash table to achieve that. and it was not really satisfactory. So include hierarchy into the identity. Include in the hash algorithm for non-spoofable hierarchy. So you set up a hierarchy for the identities, and you include that hierarchy designation in your hash into the identity, so that there is a trust of that hierarchy. Trust of the uniqueness. Possible identified is the host entity tag from our lacks hierarchy, which is an easy add. Or cryptographically generated addresses, which is RC3972, which doesn't really handle crypto agility well. There was work in 4982 to fix it, but the fix is of limited scope, at least in the reading of it. And it has a loose hierarchy in the IPv6 prefix, but there's no bounding of that prefix, and it's hard to limit and control that that prefix with the CGA for use here in remote ID in the way that CGA is currently defined. Maybe Andre, who's worked with CGA, might have something to say on that. Otherwise, we can go on. So the host identity tab added hierarchy. Point out that though I list the draft here, put it, I've taken all this text and it's now in an appendix. I think it's Appendix A in the draft. I did not update this particular part of the slide. That had requested that everything needed be in one draft, having to go to multiple drafts, as well as an ownership issue in moving hierarchical hit forward. So you don't need to look at this draft anymore. Let's look at Appendix A in the US RID draft. We had earlier back in November discussion on the list. I originally had a 1418 breakup of the 32 bits. I now have it 1616, but it is open discussion, maybe on a better partitioning. And have I've chosen EDDSA 25519 with C-Shake 128 for the public key. The nice thing about EDDSA 25519 issues, and C-Shake is neat. It offers a number of useful things moving forward down the road over using SHA-2. Also makes it much simpler in saying what is your out length, as that is one of the algorithms in the. Continue, please. Global uniqueness, how you achieve that. I had originally written a draft on registries. But since I wrote that draft, we've been having a discussion, Mike Pallet, about EPP, and there's reasons to go that way instead. When I get some text from Mike, I will pull the reference of the hierarchy registry, replace that with EPP instead. I think that's a much better place to achieve it, average off what currently exists. Look up here. I'm kind of open. I have a model in the draft of how I've done it. I'm open for some people to say a better or simpler approach to how the lookup would work. Please look at the draft and please comment And RDAP is the other approach. There's going to be more initiatives that's inside RDAP. You start with your RDAP, and then however that works, find out the one that really has it registered. That may well, again, tie into the whole USS model. And again, we're going to need text for RDAP in the draft, at least referencing it.
I'm just asking, is the sound better for everyone, or should we restart a little bit?
I can tell you he's dropping in and out.
I'm dropping in and out. That's awful. Sorry about that. 18. So I think the way forward for the global uniqueness and the lookup is leveraging EPP and RDAP. That's not what's in the draft, and I'll be needing text to add to that. I should say the key part. I don't claim I have the best DNS structures for lookup, and I'm interested in comments on improvements on that. I'm open on where we may go forward on that. Part of that may tie in with ICAO's DNS direction, which is, I know that's going to be from the grain work group that I'm active in. We're discussing it there, and having a private public DNS structures. So there might be something there down the road that still really in its early stages, in my opinion. Their own level domain that's like 2 years out. So here is the requirements which I meet, and we can discuss how well I meet them. The approval ownership, of course, it's not the remote leverages the ability for approval ownership through the auth messages, and the same with binding and the registration. It's a thing that you can now do these steps with, so we can debate whether I actually requirements or I facilitate done elsewhere, and I'm open to question on that fine point. It does specify meet the length and uniqueness, and again the non-spoofability, that again in its use in and of itself, it's how it's used which provides the non-spoofability. So again, am I facilitating non-spoofability, or am I providing? We can discuss that fine point and how to resolve that within the text of the draft. And Reg 1 and 2, the same thing. It provides a mechanism for both public and private lookups. It doesn't provide it directly. Here's how using this we can do that. So does this mean I met those requirements, or I'm facilitating other things meeting those requirements? Comments please on this.
Bob, I think you're also facilitating the last of the ID requirements, number 6, because while a hierarchical host identity tag is not inherently unlinkable, they are cheap to generate, use once, and then throw away. So they're entirely compatible with single use for unlinkability.
Okay, I will add that in. And then we have another thing to discuss, but yes. But this is important point that remote here does not give some of these requirements, but without what I'm doing, nothing else can meet these requirements. So how does that work? And people these things in other IETF areas. I'd be interested in how they see this. So the updates, what came up, the big thing, our chairs said, Bob, put everything in one draft. Which is interesting because back in November, people would say, Bob, tear this apart into separate drafts. Okay, fine, never mind. I work, and I believe I've gotten everything together. I don't claim I have everything exactly right. Please review the dependencies, how I constructed it. I had everything well put together, and you can follow how each piece leads into the next. So that, I mean, I just, that was just a major cut and pasting with Ed's job. So, but I consider this document is ready for, I believe that this to remote ID, which we can produce. Nobody else has come up with any authors. We are working in a highly constrained environment, and you have to deal with that. It may be interesting. I've been trying to find the leverage of how this may work also in Mandercraft, and actually we're talking about that in the Tron working group in the use cases. So that may come up in beyond just unmanned aircraft into manned aircraft as well. So that's, I want to get all this going. We can have something strong to point to in the ICAO discussions.
So I'm just wondering how many people think this work is ready for adoption. You can put a +1 in the chat if you. And how many people are willing to review the document?
I need reviewers, please.
Okay. Anyone thinking it's not ready? I don't see anyone opposing to that, so I will check that with my co-chair, and it's likely that we start a call for adoption very soon. Okay, next, I think we're a little bit late.
Yeah, it's 12 o'clock right now.
Should we stop now and leave the other presentation for the next interim meeting? I think we have enough work for now. Okay, Russ is dropping.
Yeah, I think we should move my stuff and operator privacy to the next interim. Definitely, because I feel like I need to really dig deep into the formats and the identity claims, because they're topics we have not touched in detail. I mean, we have drafts, they've been being iterated over, and they have implementations here, but like, I don't know how much has been reviewed, and it's not going to be a simple, oh, here's a touch and go. It's going to be a little bit of a deeper dive.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think the meeting is adjourned for today. We'll postpone all the other presentation for the next interim meeting. So my take is that we're waiting for a new version of the requirements. We will start a working group last call probably in a few weeks, but I have to consult my co-chair, and we have a call for adoption for the US solution. And probably authentication format. I think we need to, I mean, it's hard to get without the authentication format. So maybe we focused the next interim meeting on the authentication formats.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending the meeting, and see you next interim meeting.
And on the list as well, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.